So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to this Quick Bites presentation on open educational resources. My name's Philippa Burke, and sitting down the front here is my colleague Marissa Casson. This talk's going to be divided into two parts. During the first half of the presentation, I'm going to explain what open educational resources, or OERs, are and the principles under which they operate. And I'm going to talk about why OERs are important, the role they can play in education, and show some studies into their effectiveness. In the second part, Marissa will be highlighting the benefits of using OERs in teaching and learning, some of the considerations which need to be taken into account, as well as providing advice on how to locate OERs for teaching and assess their quality. She'll conclude with some examples of OERs that are already available and being used in other institutions. The term Open Educational Resource was first used by UNESCO in 2002 at a forum on the impact of open courseware for higher education in developing countries. UNESCO currently uses this definition of OERs on the screen. OERs were originally conceived to support education in lower income countries, but they're also being seen as an alternative to traditional textbooks in some countries at colleges and universities, with articles published on their use in the UK, United States and Canada. OERs differ from simply searching the internet for freely available content in that they've been vetted and curated by other educators and made available under licensing conditions which promote distribution and reuse among educators and students. OERs take a variety of forms, including textbooks, activities, texts, lesson plans and entire course outlines. Some OERs also include openly licensed media elements, which can be used within courses, and audio material, images, videos, and even software is available through OER platforms. While we're talking about what OERs include, it's probably a good time to clarify what OERs are not. OERs are not the same as massive open online courses or MOOCs. OERs and MOOCs are both part of the online learning environment, but they differ in the ways they're able to be used. MOOCs are hosted on large commercial platforms such as Coursera and edX. While the content is freely available, many courses run only during specified periods, and users must register to take these courses. The content of MOOCs is accessible to the registered user only, and it cannot be reproduced or reused without specific authorisation. MOOCs and OERs both aspire to provide universal access to high-quality education, but they differ in the ways they allow their resources to be used. The MOOC model is more rigid, while OERs are created with the intention that they will be freely available and shareable. One final difference is that MOOCs are aimed more at the individual student, while OERs are primarily aimed at making resources available to educators, which can then be assigned to students. The educator is still responsible for assessing student progress and outcomes. The OER movement is driven by founding principles, and the central one of these is that knowledge is a public good and that it benefits everyone to have educational resources which are widely accessible and freely shared. Like so many other things, OERs are able to be accessed online, and it's another example of the positive role the internet has had on access to education. But OERs go beyond accessibility because they also recognise the importance of flexibility and of reusing and sharing the resources created. This approach has been summarised by David Wiley in his 5 Rs framework of retain, reuse, revise, remix and redistribute. This framework emphasises the point that all users of OER content are able to carry out any of these activities with that content. Materials can be retained and reused indefinitely. If the material is no longer current, users can revise the material. They can also combine or remix parts of an OER with any other material and use that in their own teaching. Whether they do or do not make changes, they're also able to redistribute or share the content, and any subsequent users are also able to adapt, combine and share the material and so on. Sharing and reuse is the strength of OERs and is made possible by the permissions applied by the original creator or developer of the work. And one of the easiest ways to tell if an educational resource is an OER is to look at its licence. All OERs should be clearly marked as being in the public domain or released under an open licence. If this is not the case, the resource is not an OER. The most common way OER materials are released is under a Creative Commons licence. There are 6 standardised Creative Commons licences, which are combinations of the core conditions shown here. So all Creative Commons licences start with the by attribution, which gives credit to the creator of the material. The other conditions can be added to the by condition, and different combinations create the 6 licence types. But the key point to remember in the licences is that the no derivative works condition and the share alike condition can never be applied in the same licence, because the share alike condition relates only to derivative works. So if you're not allowed to have derivative works, you will not need a share alike. One of the reasons that OERs have increased in popularity in a range of institutions has been the rising cost of textbooks. A 2014 US Bureau of Labour report found that the cost of textbooks rose 82% in the decade from 2003 to 2013. This is in comparison to a 27% rate of inflation in overall CPI during the same period. The US PIRG Education Fund conducted a study in 2014 and found that 65% of students surveyed said that they had decided against buying a course textbook because it was too expensive, and 94% of those students were concerned that this decision would have an impact on their grade in the course. This concern is also shared by academics running courses who find that a student with no textbook is likely to have a poorer outcome in the course. So while OERs are promoted as providing a freely available alternative to traditional textbooks, there have been some concerns expressed in some quarters that switching from traditional textbooks to OERs would create a lower quality option for students and possibly second-class education. In response to these concerns, a number of studies have been undertaken into student outcomes using OERs instead of traditional texts. And I'm just going to give a very brief overview of 2 well-designed studies. In the first study, a series of studies were carried out at Carnegie Mellon University from 2008 to 2014, which measured the results of making an online OER component available to students of an introductory statistics course. In the first study, students were invited to register for an experimental online version of the course using an OER, instead of a face-to-face teaching course using a commercial textbook. The method was refined over the course of 3 studies, with the third study in 2012 comparing a group undertaking face-to-face learning with a commercial textbook with a group utilising OERs in a blended learning format. 605 students registered for the OER-based course and 2,439 for the traditional version of the course. Both groups took the same standardised test in statistics at the beginning and end of semester in addition to their final exams. Researchers found that the OER students performed slightly better than those who took the traditional course, but the difference in results was marginal and determined not to be statistically significant. But the main finding of these studies was that the use of OERs did not lead to lower course outcomes for students. In their 2014 paper, the authors noted that, as the result of all these studies, well-designed interactive systems have the potential to achieve at least equivalent educational outcomes while opening up the possibility of saving significant resources that could then be redeployed more productively. The second study was undertaken at the University of California, Davis, where researchers tested the effectiveness of an OER known at the time as ChemWiki in a general chemistry class. In contrast to the Carnegie Mellon studies, which compared blended learning with face-to-face teaching, this study aimed to control for teacher effect by comparing the results of 2 groups of students taught by the same instructor in back-to-back hours. One class of 478 students used the OER, while the control class of 448 students used a commercial textbook. All other variables were kept as identical as possible, including common tutors and grading rubrics. Researchers also administered pre-tests to identify any possible prior knowledge differences between the groups. All assessment for the 2 groups was identical, and the results found no significant difference between the overall results of the 2 groups. The ChemWiki OER is now part of a larger OER, LibreTexts, which you can see here, and is being used at 10 educational institutions, including UC Davis. In November 2015, it was estimated that this single OER has saved students more than $1.5 million US since March 2014. In summary, while there have been some concerns about OERs and the quality of educational outcomes for students, these studies demonstrate that students attained as good or better results using OERs. I'm now going to hand over to Marissa to talk more about OERs in practice.
In the second half of this talk, I would like to take a moment to talk about the benefits and the considerations of using open educational resources in your teaching. I'd also like to point out some of the main repositories and show you a couple of examples of OERs. To start, I thought it would be useful to talk through some of the characteristics of open educational resources. As Philippa mentioned earlier, OERs are based on the 5Rs framework: retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. When an open educational resource is created using this framework, they should translate into the following 5 characteristics: accessible, collaborative, cost-effective, equitable, and adaptable. The premise of OERs is based around a culture of sharing and learning, encouraging teachers and students alike to adopt existing educational resources, adapt, and then share with others to maintain this cycle of collaboration and continuous improvement. OERs offer equal access to knowledge for everyone and allow resources to be adapted to meet accessibility needs, making them equitable. Predominantly digital, they are by nature accessible, and being in the public domain, they are an economical teaching and learning tool. So, what benefits do OERs bring? For students, they are a cost-effective means of obtaining information about a particular area of study. Resources provided to students can be customised to best fit their learning needs, making the material relevant and engaging. Predominantly digital, they are easily accessible via a URL, and in some cases there may be an opportunity for students themselves to contribute to the ongoing cycle of OER development. There's a good example of a cohort of psychology students at the University of Canberra who created their own open textbook in partnership with their lecturer to suit their learning needs. For educators, it is an opportunity to save time by making use of and building on existing open educational material. In many cases, academics are able to pick and choose segments of a particular resource, create it into their own OER, and customise to suit the unit of study. OERs can provide an opportunity to collaborate with other academics, in effect opening the channels of communication in a given discipline, and result in new collaborative ventures. How then can OERs be incorporated into your teaching? As Philippa mentioned earlier, there are a number of different types of OERs, from lesson plans to assessment exercises, simulations to diagrams. There are also a variety of open textbooks available online, which can be used as a core or as a supplementary text. And lastly, modules and lecture notes from other universities that align with the Union of Study's learning objectives can be incorporated into a class. While there certainly are many benefits in incorporating OERs into your teaching, there are also a few things you need to consider. 3 that I would like to touch upon today are compliance, quality, and time. The first one is compliance, essentially knowing what you can and can't do with an OER. As Philippa mentioned earlier, OERs reside in the public domain or have been released under a Creative Commons license. Over time, you will become familiar with the 6 different Creative Commons licenses based on a combination of these 4 badges. But in the meantime, click on a Creative Commons license attached to any OER and it will take you through to a page that explains exactly what you can and can't do with that resource. For example, if an OER has the No Derivative badge, then feel free to use the OER in your teaching, but be aware that you cannot modify it in any way. As in any academic work, once you use an OER, it's important to credit the source. Creative Commons Australia have these 5 handy tips for crediting Creative Commons works, which include linking back to the original resource and indicating if any changes were made to the content. An appropriate acknowledgement should look something like the citation at the bottom of this slide. The second consideration is quality. If you're searching for a Creative Commons work, a great place to start is the Search Creative Commons site. Searching through this site filters results to those which have been released under a Creative Commons license. However, while this may limit your results to open access material, it does not filter for quality or rate under a certain level. Furthermore, with over 1 billion Creative Commons works on the internet, the time it takes to find appropriate resources may be more than you have available. The good news is that a group of librarians at the University of British Columbia have created a handy tool called the OERR Repository Rubric, which helps grade OER repositories by quality measures. With 8 categories, this rubric helps the researcher rate the quality of resources in a repository. Factors such as audience assess whether resources are intended for high school, community colleges or university level students. Other categories include subject coverage and licensing permissions. Each category has 3 levels, rating from 3 to 1. Looking at authority, you can see that level 3 means content must be peer-reviewed and affiliated to a higher educational institute such as MIT or Harvard. Level 1, in comparison, includes material that has no visible review standards and no visible affiliation with a university or organisation of merit. This rubric is intended as a tool to use when stumbling upon a new repository, to assess whether the repository is worth exploring before you spend time searching for individual resources. The third consideration is time, and with this in mind, here are a few repositories that fit level 3 of the OER repository rubric, or in other words, repositories that contain OERs of a university standard. One of the longest running and highest profile OER initiatives is the Open Courseware project from MIT, which began in 2002. It features course material from around 2,000 MIT courses. With over 2 million views each month, it has become a model for many other OER repositories. Mellon, which stands for Multimedia Educational Resource for Learning and Online Teaching, was initially created by California State University, but has since developed into a consortium of 4 universities who have collaborated to create a comprehensive repository of open access content. Openstax, founded by Rice University, an open learning initiative administered by Carnegie Mellon University, contain resources that can easily be incorporated into a university's LMS, such as Blackboard. As you can see, these repositories tend to have the backing of major universities, who are actively trying to promote a culture of openness and sharing. So what sort of OERs are you likely to find in these repositories? Well, a repository like the Open Textbook Library focuses predominantly on open textbooks. This example here, Research Methods in Psychology, has been written by Dr. Paul Price from the California State University. Initially published in 2010 as a commercial publication, this book has been repurposed by librarians at the University of Minnesota into an open textbook. This adaptation has involved reformatting the publication, replacing some images and figures with suitable open access equivalents, but not significantly altering the original text. An academic could very easily use the textbook or a chapter of it for a class, and students have the option of downloading a version of the resource that best suits their learning style. The advantage of using a resource like this from the Open Textbook Library is that it has been reviewed by a faculty from a variety of colleges and universities to assess their quality. Furthermore, there are no fees involved and full references and learning objectives are included throughout. Openstax, which I mentioned earlier as an initiative of Rice University, contains a number of textbooks and accompanying material. This Introduction to Chemistry resource has been developed primarily by academics from 4 separate universities, with the intention of allowing others to adopt and adapt to their teaching and learning needs. As you can see, the textbook is searchable, making it user-friendly for students, and with the drop-down contents menu, it's easy to jump to a particular topic. The textbook is also accompanied by instructor and student resources. In this version, the same open textbook shown on the previous slide has been adopted by LibreText. LibreText is built around a core principle of collaboration, where OERs are constantly revised by students, faculty, and outside experts to supplant conventional paper-based books. Originally an initiative of University of California, Davis, it has developed into a multi-institutional collaborative venture. Some of you might recognise the LibreText logo from one of the case studies Philippa mentioned earlier. They have adopted the textbook from Openstax, incorporating it into their Essential Ideas of Chemistry OER, which is a curated hub of information and assessment activities pertaining to chemistry. Searching through the LibreText OER, sections of content have been customised for specific universities in the US and internationally. Including this customised content demonstrates one of the key advantages of OERs, the ability to tailor learning resources to specific needs, while also encouraging the culture of openness and accessibility, allowing others to adopt the modified content and perhaps adapt if required. These are just a couple of examples of the types of OERs currently available. If you are interested in incorporating OERs into your teaching, I would strongly encourage you to download a copy of the British Columbia OER Repository Rubric and use this to assess the quality of a repository before you start navigating resources. Alternatively, please do feel free to contact your academic liaison librarian, who will be happy to assist in navigating material. OERs are a chance for universities to share, use and reuse knowledge to improve learning and teaching. They are an opportunity to break down some of the barriers created by traditional publishing models and open education to a wider audience. Thank you. Are there any questions?
And do resources often get submitted to multiple repositories?
Yeah, I have noticed that there are some that, like for example, there were some that were in Mellon, but then they were also available in OER Commons. So things like OER Commons isn't administered by a particular university, but it's basically just a hub where you can go to find lots of different resources. And if you click on any of them, you'll see, okay, this one was originally from Mellon, and this one was from Openstax, etc. So it's just, I guess, another search tool. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.